What stood out for you as you read that?
Just the two things it did were the perfectionist specifications and also the part about the disturbances. It's been an interesting week for me, so those things came up. Um, there's a man I talked to. I've only been doing this about 14 and a half years, and there's a man I talked to. He always says, he goes, my perfectionism is just procrastination, because I got to get this right. If I don't, I can't do anything else until I get this thing right. And so I relate to that. And so I really try to look at that carefully and make sure I'm not just, I can set something aside and start something else and get to that. And the disturbances is part of, I had something that is greatly disturbing happen this last week. And I realized I was allowed to be disturbed by it. It would disturb anybody. So it wasn't something that I created or something, and that's all right. But I didn't go out and overreact about it. I took care of the things I needed to do, made the phone calls I needed to make, and let the experts handle it. And that's not something that would have happened 15 years ago by far. However, I wouldn't be in position to have that happen 15
Yeah.
years ago. So really, that's what stood out was the perfectionism. That's to me is procrastination and the hobbling demands of circum the sorry.
No, listen, the two things that you highlighted are worth really reflecting on for a second. But I've heard recently, and the way I think about procrastination, it's a fear of unleashing this critical self if I don't do things the way my perfectionist self tells me I should. So it's a way of protecting myself from hating myself. But it's one of these solutions that is common for, I think, a lot of us, is we solve a problem by creating another one. We solve a problem by creating another one. So when I procrastinate, instead of me looking at my perfectionist specifications, what that means to me is that all of us have internalized a whole set of ideas of how we should be if we're going to be okay and how the world should be. And these things, when we do it, Mark, they become absolutes. There's no negotiating them. They are hardwired as an absolute. I must be like this or else. And that becomes a real challenge because those ideas, they're not based on being a human common being, like you just said. They're based on some idealized image of myself and how I should be. So that's one part of it, and it's really powerful for us to take a look at those because, I don't know if you've ever seen the talks Herb and I do, but one of the slides we show is this guy holding up this jail, right? Or he's not holding it up. You just see him in jail looking out, right? And then we zoom out and you see he's standing in the desert and he's the only one holding the bars. There's no walls around him. It's a self-imposed imprisonment. And that's what ideas do to us, right? They really put us in that kind of an emotional jail. And then we just hope somebody's going to come along and let us out. And that's why when we say no one is coming, it's so powerful because we're going to have to figure out how to let these things go. I mean, it is about letting go of a lot of things in terms of emotional sobriety. So, and look, the other thing you brought up, which I thought is really a great example of what emotional sobriety is. It's not overreacting or underreacting to a situation. And that's what you described. You didn't overreact to it, you didn't underreact to it. You got right into the sweet spot and dealt with it. And that's emotional sobriety, finding that balance. So thanks, Mark.
No, thank you. Thanks for letting me help.
You're welcome. Well, we are continuing our journey about relationships and learning how to hold on to ourselves in relationships. And I want to put this into a context because, I've said all along, It's not what's wrong with us that's the real problem. In other words, we don't need to be fixed to get better. We need to grow up to get better. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's try to take a minute and to understand development. So, the when I talk about differentiation, this idea of differentiation was applied to psychology by a Dr. Murray Bowen. And he was trained as a psychiatrist. And at the time he was trained, psychoanalytic theory and behaviorism were the two predominant different theories in psychology and two different systems of helping people and treating people. And he thought that they missed something, that they were a little bit, in some way, disconnected, he thought, from existence, and not just our existence, but he approached this more from an evolutionary perspective. And what he did is he looked at the basic building block of life, which is cells. And this is what he discovered, that growth was discovered to be a process of transformation or differentiation. And they observed that cells divide and group themselves into new forms with new functions. And development involves progression through successive stages. These stages are successively more complex at each level of growth. So take that in for a minute. Every stage of our development, as we're going through our development, each stage is more complex than the stage that preceded it. Now you think about that just from a physical developmental point of view of a child, right? Of an infant. At first the infant at first the infant does not have the ability to turn from their back to their stomach, from their stomach to their back. And eventually, with mother's help and some practicing, they put the baby on their belly and they turn over to their back. And what's happening is they're starting to develop a much more complex neurological system, right? These neurons are starting to connect, and make these connections so that they have some control over their ability to move. And as they continue through their development, that neural complex network becomes more and more complex to the point where the child ends up being able to crawl. Now, can you imagine all the signals that are going from the brain to the body and to the muscles and to the limbs that are executing that behavior, that crawling? And then the next stage is after the child crawls, they pull themselves up and they start to balance. Well, that's more complex than crawling. Then they let go of that and they take their first step. And now walking becomes the next part of their development. Well, that parallels our emotional development in life. And each stage, if it's successful, will lead to the next stage of development, which is much more complex than the stage that precedes it. What we know is that our culture is stuck at a very early stage of development. The way that Eric Fromm describes it is he says we're stuck at the infantile stage of grandiosity. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that we make everything about us. Our personal importance is overemphasized, and we never move to the next stage, which is more complex than that stage of being able to be aware of in relationship to others. The development of more empathy. What later on Bill calls, we have no idea of what a true partnership looks like in a relationship. Emotional sobriety can be thought of as the next developmental stage that none of us have reached. And it is much more complex than any of the stages that preceded it. And we need to understand that, and we need to understand it because we got to give ourselves a break when we're starting to learn this stuff and practice it. that it's not going to be easy. We're not just going to be able to snap our fingers and become emotionally sober. It's going to take a lot of practice, making mistakes, learning from our mistakes, figuring out how to do things better, how to integrate some of these ideas into our life. And so there needs to be a lot of room for us to learn because we are learning something that is much more complex than we have ever, that heretofore that we have ever considered in our lives. Now, with that being said, let's now connect it to what we're talking about, holding on to our relationships. There's no greater challenge in your life than to be in a relationship with someone and hold on to yourself. Now, why is that? Why is that such a challenge? Because the more important a person becomes to you, the more difficult it is to hold on to yourself. The less of a solid sense of self that you have developed, the easier it is for that self to give away to the pressures that occur in every relationship. To give yourself up to be what the other person wants you to be. Because we're all stuck in our development. You know, when Bowen looked at our culture, he rated it. He had this scale of 0 to 100, with 100 being a person that he says it's a theoretical 100 because nobody ever gets there, but a person that's completely differentiated, that's standing on their two emotional feet, that holds on to their emotional center of gravity all the time, doesn't give it away, does not let other people define them, has a solid but flexible sense of themselves, can roll with punches, is able to act for themselves without being selfish and act for others without losing themselves. He says that's at 100. He says we in our culture are at about a 40. We're not even halfway on that scale of differentiation and development. We've got a long way to go. A long way to go. And that's what Bill observed when he started to really pay attention. And he's not the only one. If you've been to any of my talks, either alone or with Herb or with Tom, or, you know, you hear that I bring in all of these other psychotherapists that were really saying the same thing, is that we're stuck at an early stage in our development. And this is about growing up, not fixing you. You're not broken. You're stuck is where you are. And we need to grow ourselves along these lines. And it's a very complex set of concepts and ideas that we're trying to integrate here. So we have been talking about how to hold on to ourselves, and I had Julia join me in the room, and we went over some examples for me to demonstrate some of the ways that we can handle a challenging situation. So Julia, would you mind coming and joining me again tonight?
Sure. I'd be happy to argue some more.
Oh boy, she's loaded for bear this evening. You guys heard that? She's ready to go. Did you have a fight with your husband tonight? Tell me about it
No,
before.
no, not at all.
You sure? Is there anything you want to say to him?
Not yet. I'll
Not
put
yet.
it that way.
Well, you're keeping your options open. Good for you. All right. So remember, we're gonna do a few things like well, last time you and I did this with Kim, and we talked about the importance of not if I am communicating to you, not using why questions, right? Because why are feel bad questions. But I said, why didn't you call me? I'm saying, hey, you did something wrong by not calling me. And it's a
Mhm.
terrible way to communicate my desire to you, right? It's a lot cleaner if I said, I missed you today. I was really hoping you called. Is everything all right that you didn't get a chance to call me? So I think of you. I don't think that you're there to just serve my feelings. You are a separate person and have a life. So I have some empathy that you might have gotten hung up or something else came up for you that was important. And that's okay because if I have some level of maturity, I don't define how you feel about me by you adhering or complying with my demands.
Right.
So we talked about those, right? We went through things like, why do you talk to me like that? Or why didn't you call me? Or why didn't you let me know what you were doing after work? All right. We went through a lot of those things. I think one that I had on here that we didn't talk about is if your partner comes to you and says, why don't we have sex anymore?
Hmm.
You know, it's been months. In fact, I can't even remember the last time we have sex. Julia, why don't we have sex anymore?
Yeah, that does feel kind of like, yeah, because I like you less. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
especially
agree. Yeah,
because
I
you ask
agree.
me why questions like that. I don't want to have sex. But see, it puts you on the defensive, like all of a sudden you're responsible for us not having sex. Do you see how I deflected any responsibility by that?
Yeah, I still think there's a way you could turn that conversation skillfully and say, hey, well, let's talk about what's going on. And I hear that you're concerned, but I hear what you're saying that that's not the most direct way to set that up. And it does kind of put, like, I
Well,
felt it put me off balance a little bit.
I'm
Yeah.
defensive. See, that's
Right.
one of the four horsemen, right? We talked about Gottman, talked about the four things that are going to really damage a relationship is criticism, defensiveness, contempt, right? And emotional withdrawal or stonewalling, right? So that then definitely lends itself to that. So, all right, so handle it. Let's see you deal with that. Me saying, why don't we have sex anymore? Now try to turn it around. Let's see how well you do that.
Well, wow, I hear you saying that you're concerned about it. I've noticed that it's been a while too, and I don't like that. Let's talk about what's going on and, see how we can like make that more of a priority in our lives.
So that's one way. You see, what you did is you now went to reach into me, and in some way, you saw that I had a concern that that was missing,
Yeah.
right? You did that part. All right. So let's flip it around and let's have you say that to me.
Okay.
On my
Hey,
part,
Alan, why don't we have sex anymore?
well, look, I hope what's behind that is that you're saying that you miss that with me. Is that true, do you?
I do.
Okay. I miss it too. And I think we need to have a hard conversation about this because this has been going on for a while. And I'll tell you, quite frankly, I'm bored with the kind of sex we're having. I don't like it. It's not exciting. We're doing the same thing that we've done. We've been married 20 years. I know what's going to happen. It's like when I take your pants off, I know what your underwear is going to look like. It's not new for me anymore. And I've gotten to a place, and I don't want to put that on you. I think I'm responsible for that too. But I think for me, there's a part of me that's shy, and I don't want to say some of the things that I'd like from you, that I'd like you to do, and that I'd like to experiment with, because I think you're going to think weird of me, or that, my God, who's this guy I'm married to? Is he a pervert or something? I mean, not that you've ever done anything like that, but that's all in my head. And I'm even having a hard time. I'm embarrassed now as I start to say that to you.
Are we still?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, I'm really glad you're saying that. I've felt like that a little bit too. And, honestly, like I've been a little bit shy to talk about it too. So I'm really glad you brought it up.
See, so there's always an opportunity. And so let's step out of the role playing for a minute. See, there's always an opportunity in any conflict to have a deeper and more meaningful connection and more intimacy.
Is the vulnerability, and I hope everybody doesn't mind me asking a question in the middle of this, but when you say add more self, is that sometimes adding, because I notice when you do this, you usually make yourself a little bit vulnerable, right?
Yes, that's what I want to do is I'm taking
Yeah.
this as an opportunity to, instead of pushing it away and trying to resolve it real quick, I'm opening up something that's been uncomfortable for me to open up and talk about. And so when I do that, typically, look at what your first response was. Even when I was saying it, you were leaning towards me.
Yeah.
Happened automatically in you. You don't even, it's just because if we're connected in that way and I start to talk about that, it's going to interest you because it's something that's real personal between us, right? And it's meaningful between us. It's a way that we express our love and enjoyment of each other and stuff like that. And so that it becomes stale is a real reflection of us being stuck in our relationship. And see, that's what I want people to hear is you and I role play these things. There's always an opportunity. There's always a hidden opportunity in every conflict, in every disappointment, in every what people would call negative emotion. There's an opportunity for greater intimacy. I can't do that with you if I want to avoid it, and I'm too anxious to go into it. See, if I don't have any confidence in my ability to talk to you in the way I just did, then what's going to happen? It's going to go flat. I'm going to go stale. And see, this was what Dr. Kempler's great observation was about sex and marriage and in relationships. He says the door to the bedroom opens off the living room. Think about that for a minute. The door to, so how we are in our life is going to manifest itself with how we are in bed with each other.
For
If
sure.
I'm avoiding you, if I'm not, if our relationship has gone stale, if I'm not talking to you about things that make us alive, even though they may be scary, but that create that excitement, that same deadness is gonna show up in our bedroom. It's just gonna become an act rather than an experience.
Yeah. And I think it creates distance when, those things are there and they get swept under the rug.
Yeah. And they get swept under. I mean, look at, I've swept them under the rug in my life. I've swept them under the rug a lot in my life. Hopefully I'm going to do that less at this point in my life. I'm 73. I'm hoping that the last well, however many years I have, I don't sweep as many things under the rug. That rug was very bumpy. A lot of stuff was swept under it. So the next category of communication I want to focus on is what we call intrusiveness. It's when I tell you how you feel without checking in. That's what intrusive is when I say to you, let's say we're sitting at the dinner table and we're eating, and you put down your fork and you're done. And I say to you, you're still hungry. Eat some more. What? Now
Doesn't it?
that happens a lot with parents, by the way. I had a mother who she was Italian and she measured my love for her by whether I cleaned my plate or not, right? At home. So she,
German grandmas are like that also. At least mine.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's always, you're still hungry. Finish your plate. No, I'm not hungry. That's not my experience. I'm full. This was delicious. I want to be okay with what I just had, but know that she was going to tell me how I felt about it.
Yeah.
This,
My mother would say,
oh, go ahead. Let Rob say it. He's jumping right in.
my mother would say, I'm cold, go put on a sweater.
There it is. It's that same thing. So if I start out a conversation with you and I say, you don't want to spend time with me anymore, you see what I've done? I've now been intrusive. I'm telling you what you think. And now I've put you in a position where you need to do what?
Defend myself, or at least I feel like I want to.
Well, of course you're going to want to because now you'd feel like, my God, I've just told you you're a bad person. Because of course, only a good person would want to spend time with me. I mean, it's that eccentricity, right? The arrogance that we have. So what do you do if someone says that to you?
In
So
real
so
life?
yeah.
Yeah.
So if I say that to you, you don't want to spend time with me anymore. How do you take care of that with me?
Yeah. Well, wow, like what's going on that, that you feel that way? That's really not I do want to spend time with you. But clearly something's happening between us where you feel like I don't. Can you tell me more about that and like what maybe you need that you're not getting?
Okay, so you're trying to now help convince me and reassure me that, that's going on. Now do it with me and I'll show you another way to do it.
Okay. Um, Alan, like we never spend time together anymore, and I know it's because you don't want to hang out with me anymore.
Well, when you talk to me like that, I really miss and would love for you to make more room for me to participate. Like right now, you've made a decision about where I am and what's going on with me, and you don't check in with me. I want you to check in with me with that. And I'll tell you where I stand with that. I do enjoy spending time with you. There's times I don't, but most of the time I do. And we could talk about if you'd like to know when I do and when I don't. And we can explore that and see if we can change it. But I really don't like when you tell me how I'm feeling. I want you to check things out with me.
Good boundary.
Yeah, now we're back into, remember you said last time, how do you set a boundary? So now what I've done is there's been a natural incursion on my being. Not because you're a bad person. You probably learned to do that growing up, right? That's a lot of this stuff is bad habits, right? So I'm not in any way saying that. So there's a natural incursion on my space, on who I am. And so now my job is instead of either caving in and trying to convince you or totally stonewalling you or getting mad at you about it, I've got to find a way to participate, right, in protecting and defining my own psychological space in our relationship. So I'm claiming this is me, right? This is who I am. You're not having any room for that when you talk to me that way, and I'd like there to be room.
Mhm.
What did it feel like when I said that to you? What
Fine.
did you experience? It was okay, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was clearly setting a boundary, but it was soft, you know.
That's a good point.
It didn't feel like an elbow to the solar plexus. It felt more like yeah.
Elbows to the solar plexus are what we call hard startups, right?
Mm,
They're hard startups. And hard startups are typically going to create a defensive reaction.
sure.
Unless you're dealing with somebody who's at that next stage of development that is much more complex than most of us are at, right? We're trying to get there, right? That's why we're doing this. That's why we're talking about what our vision for us may be if we learn how to do some of this stuff. Well, I've got a bunch more. We'll continue this next time, but let's invite Herb and Tom in and let them comment on some of the things and the other Tom too. So we got two Toms and a Herb coming into the room. Somebody's been requesting to record. We do record this stuff and it is posted in the YouTube channel under Optimal Recovery. Patrick Newman does that and the link will be put in chat here in a minute. So you'll be able to get that recording at that YouTube channel.
Alan, someone posted a question in the chat, came directly to me, and I don't know if you want to jump in on this now or save it for another time. But the question is, why are we as a culture in a stage of infantile grandiosity? What is that a reflection in our culture? Do you have an understanding of that?
Well, I just think it's that we this culture we're in is a culture based on having. It's very materialistic. And we've left out the other part of our development that's equally important. Look, I love being in our country. I wouldn't be in any other country, but we're out of balance. Bill talked about that we forgot about character development as an important thing in our culture. And so what the other side of it is that's the having, and then there's the being, and the being side is more the spiritual side. And that's the part, that's the next stage in our development, is to learn how to balance this out. And that's why, when Bill said he thinks that our way of life is for everyone, there is a lot of wisdom in that, because this is the next stage so far. And for so many people, the next stage in development. This emotional sobriety stuff is some very complex ways of being in this world. It's wonderful. It's exciting. When you start to discover it, it's amazing. But it's a lot to integrate for us. So I hope that answers that. Well, good evening, gentlemen.
Hi.
How are your complex developments taking place? How are you guys doing?
Huh?
Oh, I love you, Tom.
I did to stick with the theme. I think Herb should tell you what I'm feeling, and I'll tell you what Herb's feeling.
My daughter always asks me, "How's your feeling today?"
The one,
The one feeling that
Oh, that's great. You
you
gotta
have
go.
experienced.
I had it here a moment ago.
Yeah, exactly. Alan, you mentioned a word that really pressed my button right at the beginning, and that was the partnership word. My frame of reference is coming from the steps and analyzing the stages of development there. In terms of those first three steps are a relationship with reality itself. And the next four steps are a relationship with myself, and the next three steps are a relationship with others, which is the panoramic view. If you step way back in terms of a relationship with life itself or reality itself, and I'm fascinated with human development, and I'm not so sure it's true that we're at that level culturally of the adolescence, but um, human development goes into cycles, and you mentioned this discovery of differentiation. And that's really the key to the human development. It's all about the improvement of consciousness, but it goes in cycles. I mean, the Greeks were incredibly conscious. The Romans were incredibly conscious at some level, but they were absolutely unconscious at some other levels. I mean, we had the whole development in history of the Renaissance where they became very conscious in a very different way. And now we have such psychological sophistication over the last 100 years only that there's a whole other level of consciousness. So I'm seeing, you mentioned evolution. I'm seeing evolution as an evolution of consciousness that goes in cycles of, one of the philosophers used like a three-stage, a thesis, an antithesis, and a synthesis. But it's that differentiation moving very much like the cellular structure that creates from simplicity to complexity. And I'm not sure.
that's well said, Herb. Very well said. I love that. Thesis to antithesis to synthesis. See,
Yeah.
each stage is more complex. Each stage
Yeah.
is more complex.
Well, and the author that I have had made a real difference in making this real for me is Ken Wilber.
Yes.
And he says
Yeah.
it's the theory of everything. And he talks about this, the evolution of consciousness as manifest in human behavior. Anyway, that's enough from me.
Yep. I hadn't thought about Ken Wilber in a long time. I need to go back and reread some stuff. He's had a real impact on me earlier.
He's brilliant. Yeah, just brilliant.
That's what I always say about support. We're each other's post-it notes. So when you say something, I expose myself to this kind of group for lots of reasons. But one of the reasons is it just reminds me of things like that, and keeps things fresh for me. The only thing I want to say, and I don't think it's too far off the course, but I like what you're doing with with basically, the why question. It's like, and what I do is that what I want to do is just kind of just take that a little bit farther and say, because I do this with couples a lot, where I really listen for and try to help people, educate people what to do when you identify rhetorical questions in communication. And man, we have them. We ask so many. You don't even know. You know you you don't even know how many rhetorical questions we ask. You know what I mean? It's like, so just then I didn't ask you a question. I didn't ask I didn't care if you're going to tell me what you mean. I just asked you the question. And it's such a disrespectful way of communicating, first of all. um, I will say real quickly, one time with my friend Jules, that we used to do eating disorder workshops with, we did a survey on Facebook to see if we could find the best ever rhetorical question. And the runner up was "What the fuck?" It's like, and the winner was Jules had it, and it was. And I love the detail of it. It's, were you born with your head up your ass? It's like, see, I like to analyze that just for a second. It doesn't assume that your head's always been up your ass. I want to know if you had that from the beginning, or if later this happened. So it's a curious thing. But anyway, when I am helping people with rhetorical questions, one of my favorite things to do is to take the rhetorical questions and say, let's actually use it as a question and answer it. And I use silly little examples like we do it with ourselves all the time. If I ask myself, why am I such an idiot, which I have asked myself many times in my life, it's like, even if I take that and I look for progress, not perfection. If I take it and twist it a little bit and say, what could I do today to be a little bit less of an idiot? Okay. I'm moving forward. It's like, I'm not even asking myself to be kind or real compassionate with myself. I'm just making a step in the right direction. It's action oriented, and it's my responsibility to do it. Of course, I'm not coming up with great examples in my head right now while I'm talking about it, but it comes up in relationships frequently. And I think it's good for us to learn, but I also think they provide in therapy, Alan, to me, they provide a really great opportunity to demonstrate to people how far afield our communication has gone, that when we don't even think about it. So.
Well, I'm prompted though, because I think the questions are so instrumental in communication.
Mm-hmm.
But real questions.
Real questions with curiosity. With a space after because that's another thing. People will ask questions in communication, and then they just keep going. It's like, I mean, and I know why you do that. If I do that because I don't want to know your answer, it's like either I'm too impressed with what I'm getting ready to say, or if it's a personal relationship, I may not want to know what you have to say. So
I may not want to make you uncomfortable to think that deeply about and so vulnerably about what we're talking about.
Very well.
Thank you, Herb. I appreciate it.
I don't care that much about you.
It's very telling to me when you said that, Herb. I go like, I don't think I've ever had that. But that would be concern for the other person.
But there is avoidance of that, because there is a tendency to not want to make someone uncomfortable that you care about. But it's the same. Yeah. It's that creating. It's putting fear in too much of the driver's seat of the relationship.
It's the anxiety, right, Alan? You mentioned this before. Because it might fracture what we have, and it's so delicate. I don't want to, I don't want to lose you, because I think I need you to complete me.
Yep.
And for me, that fear can be actually ultimately selfish, because your discomfort can make me uncomfortable.
Yep.
And I be really careful.
Oh, yeah.
you're
Yeah,
driving.
that's a good point, Julie. That's usually what it is. I mean, it's like, that's, I'll speak, I'll abandon my gender for a moment. I think a lot of men I've worked with in based on myself would say, like, I hate it when Dee Dee is upset. But why, if I really look at it closely, why have I hated that she's upset? Because I'm a basket case when she's upset. I really, if I was really being honest, I would say, would you actually feel better or seemingly feel better so that I would be okay? And it's like, but we're not, but I'm not saying I'm even aware of that all the time, but it really is. It's true. But the other thing, I want to go back just real quick to these. The other thing we do is we ask questions and we keep talking because, and I see this a lot. And again, this is, I, it's a good thing I'm as fucked up as I am because it has given me so much stuff to work with, as a therapist. It's like I have so many reference points here. But one of the things that I hear and see in couples is people don't want to. They don't want to play it. John Sanford has a book where it teaches you to have communication like a game of catch, where you're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And we're ball hogs. Once we get the ball, I'm doing it right now. As a matter of fact, I'm just going. Blah, 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 blah. I'm just going to keep going instead of shutting up and let somebody else go. But that's part of communication.
I don't trust you. As soon as I start talking to you, I'll jump in.
Well,
Oh, it would have been really funny. I didn't think about that.
isn't one of the techniques to have, pass the stick so only the person who has the stick
Oh yeah, the
talks?
talking stick. Yeah, oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I do that. But yeah.
I mean, that's an effective technique.
Oh, it's
Otherwise,
really
people are
well. It's
always
also, yeah. It's
interrupting.
very it's
You
very
know,
telling because somebody because if you and I do that, Rob, you're going to have the stick, and my tendency is to lean in towards you and just kind of stare at you to try to communicate to you. You need to give me the stick. Seriously.
well, and it too, see it when you do that, and I understand why people do that, so that there's not an interruption. But the interruption is usually caused by anxiety. If somebody is saying something that's making the other person anxious, and if there is a true partnership, there seems to be an ability to say, "All right, well, let me hold off on what I want to say. There's something going on for you with this right now. What are you making you anxious about what I'm saying? That you need to interrupt me? Let's talk about that for a minute." I'd like to finish, but I don't want to ignore the fact that it seems to be a hardship for you, or creating a hardship for you. What can we tell me what's going on? It's that kind of thing. Tom, what are you thinking about this, Potash? What?
Well, I keep going back to I had a sponsee who I was introducing to emotional sobriety. He was attending this group regularly, 4 years ago, I think it was. And we had the conversation about, he had an ex-girlfriend and whether he should get into a relationship and all that. And I did the typical 12-step thing about, be ready and give yourself some time and maybe not that relationship. And he came in and he asked you, and you said, how else are you going to learn to grow if it had to be in a relationship unless you're in a relationship? And I was like, damn. Not only did he, just reverse what I had told the guy earlier, but you were right. Like this life experience and these relationships I have are the only opportunity I get to experience growth and the uncomfortability of being in a relationship, right? And to sit through that anxiety as it arises and to see, if I can, as Tom puts it, I'm a recovering asshole. Can I be a little bit less of an asshole today? And in a very, in a gentle way towards myself, be able to go like, can I let this relationship, it's not just with my wife, but my daughter, coworkers, friends, have its own space, right? And not either run away or bulldoze it. And it's tough to be in there.
Well, that's where anxiety comes in, man. See, anxiety is the fly in the ointment.
Yeah.
If you're reactive, really pay attention to what is how am I making myself anxious? That's a better question. It's what is making me anxious?
Yeah.
How am I making myself anxious right now? What meaning am I giving to this situation, to this experience that's a threat to my existence? Rollo May was very clear about that, is that anxiety, acute anxiety, has to do with a threat to our existence. Chronic anxiety has to do with imagining some awful thing happening in your future. But acute anxiety, the anxiety you feel right now, has to do with a threat to your existence.